So what's the gap principle all about? Well, this type of activity in the world of language teaching is typically known as an information gap. But leaving information aside for the moment, if we think about our students, they bring to the classroom differences in experience, differences probably in opinion, and certainly differences in things that they know or don't know. So if we want to create communication, we can exploit these differences. In terms of information gap, this is perhaps a little bit different, because this is a gap, a difference that we engineer for the purpose of creating communication between our students. So it's very easy to create a situation where student A has some information and student B has different information, and together they need to communicate to be able to have the complete information. But the same is true of opinions, knowledge and experience. We can use this to do activities like brainstorming activities, discussion activities, completing certain tasks together, where their differences in experience and knowledge and opinion perhaps complement each other. So this is one way in which we can create and exploit a difference in information, and we can create a situation where one student has some information and the other student has to draw using the information that the partner provides. We'll see an example of this now. So let's imagine an art class. What we could do is take the picture on the left and put it on the interactive whiteboard, or indeed give one student a copy of this picture. That student's partner has to draw the picture, but obviously without seeing it. So the first student has to describe the picture as well as possible so the student can try and draw this. Now later they would reverse roles, and perhaps student B would get the picture on the right hand side and student A would have to draw what was described to them. Now we achieve many different functions with this. This is art in this case. So they need to work and to use vocabulary such as foreground, background, technical art vocabulary to be able to describe these pictures, as well as more commonplace expressions and vocabulary like prepositions of place, for example. Also though, here we're doing something that's not a very typical activity that you'd find in many classrooms, and we're working with different multiple intelligences here, because some students are more language smart, they have greater linguistic intelligence perhaps, and they're happy describing and not so happy drawing. Other students maybe are much better drawing than they are describing. So we're working separate multiple intelligences here, also working visual spatial intelligence when completing either of the tasks, the drawing or the describing. So we're adding variety to the classroom. In addition, we've obviously created a need for communication, because one student can't complete the task without the other student. It becomes a collaborative and a cooperative task, and a very valuable activity. We're taking or constructing a situation where students don't have complete information and they have to work together to construct and reconstruct. So we saw describe and draw, and now describe and do. This is based around, again, explaining and giving instructions, and the other student responding by doing something with their body. Now this might be quite an amusing idea, quite a funny idea for working in the classroom, but again it achieves some of the functions that we saw before with the drawing of the Bordero pictures. Again, we're working on different multiple intelligences here. they're probably bodily kinesthetic learners who would enjoy doing this kind of activity. And also it's good, it gets students doing something different, it gets them moving around and not just being sat at their desks. Now what you would have is one student with a picture describing to another student or group of students how they must position their bodies in order to recreate these poses. Now this could be used in a science class, working on parts of the body, different muscles. It could be introducing an idea of geometry, you know, with triangles and squares and right angles and different shapes and things like this. So it's an amusing way, an entertaining way, but a very practical and very communicative way of working a topic. Now this is just one example. I mean, you could do many different things, particularly in science with this, but the idea is to be creative and to start thinking about how you can do things in class in a different way, and in a way which, apart from promoting different multiple intelligences and adding variety, also introduces a gap and therefore the possibility of communication. A similar idea here. This one can be done sitting down. This is not like the yoga poses, but origami or paper art, paper folding, again, is giving instructions, one partner to another. Again, this could be worked, introduces mathematical intelligence, geometry, things like this. But really, we're simply creating a gap, exploiting that gap, and having students communicate with each other, because one knows something that the other doesn't. So we've talked about principally pair work activities until now, the describing and drawing, the describing and doing. Now the describing and drawing was related to art, but it could just as easily be related, for example, to geography. One student could perhaps explain to another a map or a landform or something like this, and the other student has to draw it. And the describe and do, well, there's infinite possibilities. But creating a gap between a student and their partner is one thing, but we can also create gaps between groups of students. So this idea of a jigsaw reading, jigsaw is a puzzle. So this is an idea that we saw earlier on in a previous presentation with the butterfly text, whereby we take quite a long text and we divide it so that each student reads only a small section, and what they do is they complete a table such as the one here about being a healthy child, and they work together cooperatively in groups to explain to their partners the information that they need to complete the table. Now this requires obviously cooperation and collaboration. It's a real communicative activity. Communication is necessary. Without it, the students can't complete the task. But they also have to think a lot more as well, because one thing is to understand something and another thing is to be able to explain it to somebody else. And again, there's movement in the classroom. I mean, working in cooperative groups and then changing groups and explaining the text that you've worked on with one group of partners to a new group adds a dimension of, more of a social dimension, I think, where students get the opportunity to work with different partners and to communicate with each other. So overall, this idea of creating a gap is just a procedure, it's just a frame of mind. It's a matter of looking for opportunities where you can do this. Now even something as simple as correcting homework can be done in this way. If you give students, I don't know, let's say for example 10 questions, a reading text and a comprehension activity, and 10 questions to answer at home. In the next class you could put the students into pairs and give one student the first 5 answers and their partner answers 6 to 10, and by speaking, by communicating, because you've created this gap, together they correct each other's answers. So it's really about looking for opportunities for gaps so that students need to communicate with each other, and this gap principle is one of the foundations of the communicative classroom.